$40 billion. Gone in 72 hours. Not stolen by a hacker. Not lost in a market crash. Erased by the very mechanism that was supposed to make it safe. TerraUSD was sold to the world as a stablecoin. $1 in, $1 out. Always. That was the promise. But the dollar peg was not backed by dollars. It was backed by math. And in May 2022, the math broke. Hundreds of thousands of ordinary investors watched their savings dissolve in real time, some losing everything they had. How does a financial instrument designed to hold its value destroy $40 billion in under 3 days? And how does the man who built it end up sentenced to 15 years in a United States federal prison? To understand what collapsed, you first have to understand what was built and how brilliantly it was sold. Kwon co-founded Terraform Labs in Seoul in 2018. He was 26 years old, a Stanford computer science graduate, and he spoke about cryptocurrency with a certainty that most people in the industry carefully avoided. He did not hedge. He did not qualify. He declared. And the market, hungry for conviction, rewarded him for it. The product was elegant in its conception. TerraUSD, known as UST, was an algorithmic stablecoin. Unlike traditional stablecoins such as Tether or USDC, which hold actual dollar reserves in a bank somewhere, UST maintained its $1 peg through a software-driven relationship with a sister token called Luna. The mechanism worked like this. If UST fell below $1, holders could burn UST and receive $1 worth of Luna in return. If Luna fell, holders could burn Luna and receive UST. The two tokens were meant to balance each other perpetually, like a financial seesaw that could never tip too far in either direction. It was, on paper, a genuinely novel idea, and for a time, it appeared to work. By early 2022, TerraUSD had grown to become the third largest stablecoin in the world by market capitalization. Luna, the governance and collateral token, had climbed from a few cents to a peak of over $119. The combined market capitalization of the Terra ecosystem reached approximately $60 billion at its height. Terraform Labs attracted serious institutional backing. The project was covered respectfully by major financial publications. Venture capital firms that had seen hundreds of pitches put real money in. Kwon cultivated a public persona that matched the scale of his ambitions. On social media, he was combative, confident, and frequently dismissive of critics. When prominent analysts raised concerns about the stability of the algorithmic peg, he did not engage with the substance of their arguments. He mocked them. He called skeptics poor. He once publicly stated, in a widely circulated post, that 95% of cryptocurrencies would fail, but that watching them die would be entertaining. The implication was clear. Terra was in the surviving 5%. The Luna Foundation Guard, a non-profit entity established in January 2022, was positioned as the reserve backstop for the entire system. It accumulated Bitcoin, eventually holding reserves that were reported to exceed $3 billion. As an additional buffer to defend the peg in the event of market stress. This was presented as proof of institutional seriousness, a mature project, building real reserves, preparing for real volatility. Investors took note. Billions of dollars flowed into the Anchor protocol, a lending platform built on the Terra blockchain that offered depositors a yield of approximately 20% annually on UST holdings, 20% annualized on a stablecoin. That number should have been a question. Instead, for most of 2021 and into 2022, it was a selling point. The first serious public warning about TerraUSD did not come from a regulator, It came from a pseudonymous blogger. In June 2021, an analyst writing under the name Sensei Algod published a detailed argument that the Anchor protocol's 20% yield was structurally unsustainable. The yield was not being generated by productive lending activity at a rate that could support those returns. It was being topped up from a reserve fund, the Anchor Yield Reserve, that Terraform Labs had seeded with its own capital. The math was straightforward. The reserve was depleting faster than it was being replenished. Without continuous injections of new capital, the yield would have to fall. And if the yield fell sharply, the billions of dollars parked in Anchor would leave. And if they left, the demand for UST would collapse. And if UST demand collapsed, the algorithmic peg would face exactly the stress it had never been truly tested against. Here is what almost no one watching from the outside knew at the time. According to subsequent court filings and the findings of US federal prosecutors, Kwon and senior figures at Terraform Labs were aware of a prior, undisclosed failure of the Terra peg mechanism. In May 2021, UST had briefly but significantly depegged. The recovery was not organic. It was managed, quietly, internally, without public disclosure. The system had already cracked once. The public did not know. New investors kept arriving. That is the detail that reframes everything that came after. The project was not simply an experiment that failed under unforeseen conditions. According to the US Department of Justice indictment and the Securities and Exchange Commission's civil complaint, investors were actively misled about the stability and track record of the peg mechanism. The DOJ alleged that Kwon and Terraform Labs made false and misleading statements to investors about UST's stability and the genuine nature of the algorithmic mechanism. The SEC similarly alleged fraud and the unregistered offer and sale of securities. But here is what no one saw coming. Not even the most vocal critics. The scale of the institutional money that had quietly accumulated exposure to the Terra ecosystem meant that when stress finally arrived, the exit would not be orderly. It would be a stampede. By late April 2022, the Anchor Yield Reserve had fallen to levels that made a rate cut mathematically inevitable. Anchor announced it would move to a dynamic yield model. The announcement was rational. The market reaction was not. Hundreds of millions of dollars began leaving Anchor within days. UST started to drift. Not catastrophically at first, a fraction of a cent below the peg, but in a system built on confidence in a mechanism, a fraction of a cent is enough to start a question. And once the question starts, in a market that operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, with no circuit breakers and no deposit insurance, the question can become a panic before any human institution can respond. The sequence of events across May 7th through May 13th, 2022 has been documented in extraordinary granular detail by blockchain analysts, journalists, and subsequently by federal investigators. What follows is what the record shows. On the evening of May 7th, approximately $285 million of UST was withdrawn from Curve Finance, a major decentralized liquidity pool. The withdrawal was large enough to destabilize the pool's internal pricing. UST began trading fractionally below $1 on secondary markets. The arbitrage mechanism that was supposed to correct this, burn UST, receive Luna, began operating, but the volume of UST seeking to exit was already straining Luna's absorptive capacity. May 8th, UST falls to 91 cents, then 85 cents. The Luna Foundation Guard begins deploying its Bitcoin reserves to defend the peg, selling Bitcoin to buy UST and reduce supply. According to on-chain data and subsequent reporting, the foundation deployed over $1.5 billion in Bitcoin reserves over roughly 48 hours. The peg did not hold. May 9th, UST is trading at 60 cents. Luna, which should theoretically be absorbing the UST burn and thus increasing in supply while falling in price, is entering what analysts would later call a death spiral. Every UST burn to defend the peg mints new Luna. More Luna in circulation means each Luna is worth less. Less Luna value means the burn mechanism produces less effective dollar support per UST redeemed. The system is eating itself. The more it tries to stabilize, the faster it destabilizes. And here is the detail that crystallized the human cost of those 72 hours. On crypto forums and social media platforms, in real time, retail investors were watching and posting. Some had their entire retirement savings in Anchor. Some had taken out loans to buy Luna at the peak. The posts ranged from desperate calculation, how many Luna do I need to sell to recover my principal, to something much darker. Helpline numbers were shared across multiple platforms. The speed of the collapse gave people no time to think. It gave them only time to watch. By May 12th, Luna had fallen from over $80 at the start of the week to a fraction of a cent. The Terra blockchain was halted twice by validators attempting to prevent further damage. It was a formal acknowledgement that the system had ceased to function. UST never recovered its peg. The combined market capitalization of UST and Luna, which had stood at approximately $60 billion weeks earlier, had effectively reached zero. The Luna Foundation guards Bitcoin reserves. More than 80,000 Bitcoin, by some reported figures, were deployed and gone. Where precisely those reserves went, and whether they were used solely for peg defense as publicly stated, became a central question for federal investigators. According to the DOJ indictment, Kwon directed the movement of approximately $100 million in cryptocurrency proceeds through multiple wallets in the months following the collapse, in a manner prosecutors alleged was designed to conceal assets from law enforcement. The legal pursuit of Kwon was itself a prolonged and complicated affair. In March 2023, Montenegrin police arrested him at Podgorica Airport, attempting to board a flight to Dubai using a forged Costa Rican passport. He had also been found in possession of a forged Belgian passport. Montenegro convicted him of document forgery and sentenced him to 4 months, which he served. The more consequential legal proceedings were already underway in the United States. In February 2020, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission filed a civil complaint against Kwon and Terraform Labs, alleging fraud and the unregistered offer and sale of crypto asset securities, including UST and Luna. Terraform Labs reached a settlement with the SEC in June 2024, agreeing to pay approximately $4.4 billion in penalties and disgorgement, one of the largest settlements in SEC history. The company, by that point, had filed for bankruptcy. The criminal case moved separately. The U.S. Department of Justice, through the Southern District of New York, indicted Kwon on multiple counts, including securities fraud, wire fraud, commodities fraud, and conspiracy. After an extended extradition process from Montenegro, Kwon was transferred to U.S. custody. In August 2025, Kwon pleaded guilty to federal charges. He was subsequently sentenced to 15 years in a United States federal prison. The victims numbered in the hundreds of thousands. Class action lawsuits were filed across multiple jurisdictions. The scale of retail losses. Ordinary people who had trusted the 20% yield, who had believed the peg was mechanically guaranteed, was documented in court filings at figures reaching into the tens of billions of dollars in aggregate. Some of those losses were held by sophisticated institutional players who understood the risks. Many were not. The broader regulatory consequence was significant. The Terra collapse became a primary exhibit in congressional hearings on stablecoin regulation in the United States. It accelerated legislative proposals in the European Union under the Markets in Crypto Assets framework, known as MiCA, which imposed strict reserve and disclosure requirements on stablecoin issuers. Algorithmic stablecoins, those without full asset backing, faced particular scrutiny. Several jurisdictions moved toward effective prohibition of the model entirely. Terraform Labs, the company, was formally dissolved following its bankruptcy proceedings. The Terra blockchain was forked by the remaining community into a new chain, but it never recovered meaningful relevance or value. The lesson the record leaves behind is precise and unadorned. A yield that cannot be explained by the underlying economics of the system is not a yield. It is a liability waiting to be called.